Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a live discussion of the Femme Afictionado book pick from October, November, which was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Before we get into that though, we have to introduce some lovely people. Maria, do you want to kick off the introductions?
Sure. So I am Maria from the Maria Might Read That. It's my BookTube channel. I read fantasy books and talk about them on there, not the most consistently, but generally speaking. And I'm a big fan of like adult political fantasy. It's my niche.
I am Hannah Blackwell. I read primarily like fantasy and romance, but I have other genres sprinkled in throughout that I read as well. My channel is Hannah Blackwell. And I guess that's it.
Hi, I'm Kaylee. My channel's name is Kaylee's Books. I'm so excited to be a guest host for Spinning Silver. And I read pretty much everything. I read fantasy, science fiction, horror, thriller, romance. Like, you give it to me, you say it's good, I'll read it pretty much. And my channel, I just do a mix of themed reading vlogs and some sit-down videos with a TBR game, and I do weekly reading sprints too.
Nice. So Hannah, do you want to jump us off there with the book's synopsis really quick?
Okay, so for October and November, we read Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. And this is a fantasy with a little bit of romance kind of sprinkled in. It's multi-POV'd, and we follow Miriam and a cast of characters. And we have Miriam, who is basically taking over for her father to lend money and then make money from the interest in order to support her family. And she gets a reputation as basically being able to turn silver to gold, which catches the attention of the local, like, frosty ice fae. I don't know if there was a specific, I guess there was a specific name. Do you guys remember that?
It was the Starrick.
Starrick, yeah, the Starrick, which are basically the frosty fae of the area. This is set in basically a mythical version of Lithuania, right? I think it was Lithuania.
I'm not sure. I thought it was taking from Slavic or like Slavic
Yes.
folklore. Yeah, okay.
Yes, but it's like it's very closely in like name to that. And I did look up that it was based on that country, but I wasn't sure I think it was Lithuania, but I'm not 100%. Possibly Latvia. But so it's basically set in that area, and we follow a cast of characters after, like I said, the fae catches Miriam catches the attention of the fae. And it's very ethereal, very atmospheric. It's very cold. It's set in winter mostly, and that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, and sorry, lag there. Perfect. Thank you, Cassidy.
It does have Jewish rep in there, but I don't know about the setting.
No, yeah.
Hi, Deb. Read this a while ago, probably last year, but it seems longer, so I'm not sure how much I will remember. We will remind you, I'm sure, and you will have lots to put in when you get those reminders. Hi, Kristen. Okay, so what was everyone's, just spoiler-free, what was your overall thoughts after finishing the book, while reading the book? Was there anything that stood out to you? And Maria, do you want to start that? We're going to just keep going in that circle. Sorry.
Are we doing star ratings now? Yes.
Yeah, go for it. Why not?
So I guess first, just general thoughts. It started off good in the first like 50 pages, then it got a little slow, and I was feeling like it wasn't fantastical enough, and then it does get more fantastical, so that got my attention, and then I had a really great time with it from that, like about the 100-page mark, I'd say. I really enjoyed it. I did give it 4 stars, but I kind of have a feeling it's going to be one of those 4 stars where it doesn't necessarily stick with me and my emotions years down the line. But I loved it during the reading experience, and I think that's just a standalone thing. It's hard for standalones to really kind of stick with me long term unless they really emotionally, like, gut punch me. And this was just a really enjoyable winter read, like Hannah was saying, just very atmospheric. I really liked the characters and just had a really great reading experience time with it.
So very similar for me, except for my issue wasn't actually the beginning part. My issue was the end, which is very common for me and Naomi and Novik. So I'm giving this book 4.25 stars, and I really enjoyed the whole book and the conclusion, but the only thing I did have an issue was the climax. And I had the same climax issue with Uprooted, where I thought that it was not clearly written enough to where I didn't think that what was happening during the climax was clear enough to where I didn't have to keep rereading it to try to figure out what was exactly was going on. And so that was the only issue I really had, was just like the execution of the climax. So that's why I gave it 4.25. But other than that, I really like the writing style. I really liked the atmosphere. I liked the setting. I liked the characters. I basically liked everything else about the book.
That's interesting. I read Uprooted by Naomi Novik is the only other one I've read, and I thought the middle there was I thought that was the weakest. So I feel like
Really?
we covered all three. Yeah, where I had beginning with this one, you had the climax, and then middle of her other book. So
Yeah.
So this book was actually a reread for me, but I was really nervous about this reread because I had read this a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but I think it was the same. I think I read it the same month it first came out. So whenever that was. And my reading taste has changed quite a bit since I first read this book. So I was concerned. I gave this book 5 stars when I first read it, but I was concerned that it wouldn't hold up. And I'm giving it 5 stars again. It did hold up for me. And this is a very surprising book for me to be giving 5 stars, because typically the type of fantasy I gravitate towards is not atmospheric. And like fairy tale-esque is kind of an anti-buzzword for me in fantasy. So the fact that this book works for me is surprising and so fun. Something about this book is just so compelling, because the first time I read it and the second time I read it for this reread, I read it in one sitting both times. So I can't really tell you I had any pacing issues, because the entire book was compelling enough for me to just need to sit down and listen. I did do the audiobook this time around, and that was my whole day. I was just listening to it as I was going about my day. And so I love the atmosphere. I love the characters. I love all of the characters in here, but of course, Miriam is my favorite character. And I just love how our characters are we don't have any super powerful people in the characters. They're all normal people. And I love seeing the arcs of these relatively normal people have an extraordinary adventure throughout the story. So I really liked the story. It's a very surprising book for me to like, but I love it.
Well, that's good to hear. For me, it was a 4.5 out of 5 stars.
Ooh.
It reminded me a lot of the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, and I absolutely loved that trilogy. I'd say the thing that kept it from a 5 star for me was some of the pacing throughout. It felt like there are some areas that could have been either trimmed or taken out a little bit, just to keep the story going at I don't know how to say it, without feeling like a slog, I guess is the best way to say it, without getting into the slogs. But I love the characters. I love how the story weaves itself together. It feels so satisfying how it all comes together, how these characters meet, and just everything about it in that regard, I absolutely loved. And I love the take on the mythical creatures that we see in this as well. So yeah, it was a great read for me.
I want more books like this and The Bear and the Nightingale. I'm just like, give me all of the frosty magic.
the polar fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, like I know some people who reread the Winter Night trilogy every winter just because it does have that atmospheric feeling to it. And it's the same with Spinning Silver. She just did it so well. I know for myself, I was apprehensive going in because I've tried, I think it's the series that she's written with the dragons, the Tempest. Is it?
Somewhere.
Yes, I tried that one. I actually wasn't a huge fan of it, so I was really worried that this was going to
Really
happen
wanna read that
again.
one. So I'm gonna hope that's not the case for me.
That was a long time ago, so things may have changed since then. But yeah, so I was a little nervous going in, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Well, her writing is so interesting because this Spinning Silver and Uprooted feel quite similar in style to me. But I haven't read the Dragon series, but yesterday I just was reading the Deadly Education series, and that writing style is so different from Uprooted and Spinning Silver. And it's crazy to think that this is the same author because, I mean, the style is really noticeable in Deadly Education with how she weaves in information and how she deals with characters and what emphasis she's putting on versus plot versus character. And I think Spinning Silver and Uprooted are just completely different vibes to her other work. So I'm interested to read the Dragon series to see what it's more similar to. But it seems like she's quite a diverse author in terms of writing style because I wouldn't be able to tell that these books are by the same person if it wasn't, the name on the cover.
I'm excited to see what she's going to do next because now she's done with the Skullman series. And I'm like, what is she going to do? Because she's so different with everything she does. I'm really actually hoping she does another like fairy tale-esque atmospheric, like Uprooted Spinning Silver. I'm hoping she comes out with another standalone in that vein.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting, Kaylee, too, is I think I've heard a lot of people say that they also found Uprooted and Spinning Silver very different, even though they're like in the same realm. I know a lot of people who didn't like Uprooted liked Spinning Silver.
I find that so interesting because people find them so polar opposite. And I'm like, I gave Uprooted 4 stars and Spinning Silver 4.25 stars, and I found them to be very similar in what I liked and what I disliked was exactly the same in both.
They're very similar in terms of like atmosphere, but I think in terms of story, I didn't think they were different, and I liked this more than Uprooted. So it is she's an interesting author.
Yeah, because Uprooted for me, it was like the climax was too long and drawn out, but still unclear. And I felt like the Spinning Silver climax was too short and still unclear. But that's just me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's very often you come across an author who can change their writing and storytelling methods so much between series that they've written that you wouldn't know them if you didn't check the cover.
Mm-hmm.
So did we have any other spoiler-free thoughts that we wanted to talk about, or did we just want to jump right into spoilers? And Cassidy, if you haven't read this, I'm sorry.
I think she might be sticking around anyway. I really liked, I think this is spoiler free because we talked about like the Fae. I really liked with the Fae you usually have this like element of how you have to phrase your kind of requests or how to be really careful with wording or kind of they will trick you and that tricksters sort of thing. And that was my favorite part of this book. I really liked the different ways that like that relationship with Miriam, that discussion kind of went about, and also just the way that that their value was placed differently on different things, just kind of this almost hypothetical value instead of like monetary value. I thought was so interesting.
Yeah, I liked how alien they felt. They really felt like different creatures from humans because I think a lot of the times Fae in stories, in fantasy in general, but especially in fantasy romance, Fae are just humans with pointy ears. There's not a ton of differences. But in this story, you could tell these are not humans. These are people that place different values on different things. They have different understandings about different things. Their whole society is built on a different version of reality than the humans in this story. And so they felt scary. They felt really scary because of just how unknown they were.
Yeah, I think she definitely did a better job than so many authors with the Fae especially. I also liked how she put women at the center of the story. I wasn't aware at the time, or before reading it, I mean, that I knew it was dual POV, but really it's like way more than, it's like way multi-POV'd,
Mm-hmm.
And there's 3 women that really have a big say in how things turn out, and they're all different but strong in different ways. And I liked what she did there with the women. Yeah. And how she incorporated 2 like different generations. I liked the girl power.
I liked that they supported each other, but not in a kind of forced way. It was just the way they went about kind of intertwining in their stories. they ended up kind of seeing things about each other. They connected and kind of could understand and sympathize, and that helped them relate to and then support each other. It was a very kind of natural, real girl power thing.
And the connections that these women had, even through their different socioeconomic classes, was really interesting to read about how they all found power, regardless of their background, but all were lacking power no matter their socioeconomic class too. We have girls who were rich and girls who were really poor, but they were all placed in these positions of oppression, and they were able to overcome it. And so it was interesting, the ties of gender to class and seeing where women especially, can find power.
Yeah.
There was this line that I bookmarked. It was toward like the later half of the book, where it talks about like the never-ending cycle of women's work, like the dishes that need to be put away, and the like kids that need to be taken care of, and the meals that need to be prepared. And I felt so seen when I read that.
She even said at one point, it was easier to just turn my brain off and do the work of a woman or whatever it was. Yeah. And I thought that was very interesting.
Well, so the focus on women were definitely a thing I enjoyed. I preferred it. The men in this book simply didn't interest me as much, not in a badly written way, however. I get that. I think there was only one male character that I was interested in, and that was the Tsar, and that had more to do with the mystical aspect than his actual character.
I liked the youngest brother too.
Yeah.
Of what was her name? Oh my gosh.
It was Wanda and Stefan. I don't remember the middle brother's name.
Sergei. Stefan.
Sergei
was the older brother, and then I think the younger was Stefan.
Yeah.
I really liked when it showed her brother's point of views at everything going on, especially Stefan's being so young, and how he viewed the situation from the eyes of a child. And I also liked, in terms of POVs, seeing the different ways people forgot what was actually going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that was well done.
Sorry if you hear my child.
It's all good.
I disagree, and I personally wish that we didn't have the male POVs in this. I like the characters, but I didn't want to be in their head. There were moments. I liked it when there were moments in the first half of the book where no one else was present, and so they needed to be the one telling it. But then Stefan had this really long bit where Wanda and I think also Irina were both present, and I wanted them to be the ones telling it. I was annoyed enough that he was the one kind of narrating it for us instead.
So I'm curious then, how did all of you fare with the jumps in POVs without any warning? Because I know I didn't have a physical copy, I had the audiobook, and over time I got used to the tone of the setting for each POV when it changed, and kind of once it got about a paragraph in or so, I was like, oh yeah, we're with Wanda or Miriam. But I think a few people might have had, I would imagine a few people had troubles with those jumps.
So I know that I've heard some people having issues with them, so I was interested in how I would see that. And so I read along with the audiobook to start before I started just listening without it. But I have to say she did do a different accent with each character, with each female character, and to me it was noticeable enough. And generally within the first paragraph of each change of character, she said something to make you aware of which character it was. Some reference to maybe, oh, my brother Stefan, or my father wouldn't do the work that I was having to do, or something that made it very clear. Between that and the change in accent, I thought it was clear, but I can understand because it wasn't a big change in accent, like or a completely different narrator. I understand how people could have issues with that. I just personally didn't.
Yeah, I think I was really wary of it because when the book came out, there were so many negative reviews about that, and that being their biggest issue. So I kind of went in thinking I'd struggle with it more than I did. And I don't know if it's because I was hyper aware and I knew about this that I kind of was looking for those context clues, but I found it really easy to follow. There were a lot of like just even the way they refer to mama or mother or papa or father and like the little clues of, like you said, who like the people around them. I was usually within the first couple of paragraphs, I knew what POV we were in.
Right.
Yeah, this time around, I didn't have, it was a different experience because I listened to audio, and last time I read it, it was purely the physical. I would say I had very, very, very minimal issues. It didn't affect my overall reading, but it took maybe like 10, 15, 20 seconds for me to be like, who are we listening to now? And then it would click. And then the first time around, I read both times in one sitting, so it wasn't significant enough to, confuse me where I had to put it down or anything. But I do remember slight confusion the first time I read it as well. But for me, it was so insignificant where it's like I can sympathize with people that had more issues than I did because I had those minimal issues, but it's not something I would have brought up on my own unless other people were already talking about it,
Yeah. I think it's going to depend on, like, every reader is different, but like Deb says here, I remember thinking that it would have been a better read for me in print, just as they had some frustrations with the changes in POV on audio. I know for myself, like similar to all of you, there was little words or things that reminded me of whose POV I was in. But usually when I was listening to the audiobook, I'm doing chores or something else that's going on. And there was a couple times where I was like, wait a second, go back. Who is this?
Yeah, I should say I think only one of us four that read it in print, like entirely. So I think that probably also went toward helping me. But I will say, I also just think I as much as I didn't have an issue with it, I don't see why you wouldn't just put character names in the chapter. Like, just do it. I don't think it would only help,
I think they had a lot of mid-chapter shifts too, so it would cause the authors like restructure the book. But yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan. I wish I love when authors do character names at the beginning of the chapters when we have a multi-POV story. But I could see why that wasn't the intention here because of, there were some chapters where we were getting like 5 different POVs in one chapter, it felt like. So it would cause some restructuring of the book for them to do that. But I love when they put the character name. So I'm all for that, but I could see how it could be complicated.
I think it was intentional for the atmospheric feeling where you're kind of like trying to figure out whose head you're in at first, or for the idea that like they're all similar in their own way and trying to kind of make them almost like a joint entity in your mind. And I think it worked, but I also think that it would still be better with character names.
So let's jump into spoilers then. Starting off with, I guess, the beginning in the sense of meeting Miriam and the situation that her and her family are in. She is the granddaughter of a moneylender, and the father isn't quite collecting what's owed him and the family, and they are essentially starving. The mother's ill, and Miriam decides enough is enough, and she goes around and basically threatens the town that if they don't pay, people from her family will come from the big city and collect the money for her. What did you guys feel about that opening scene with a young girl going out and knocking on doors being like, give me the money or I'm sending people after you?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I love how she's just like a badass who's like, I'll take over the family, like as a little girl. Yeah, if you're not going to do something to take care of my sick mom, I will, I loved it. But it also kind of pissed me off that her parents kept getting sad about it, but then just not doing anything about it. It's like, okay, if you're actually sad about it, then do something. I felt like they were kind of lazy.
Yeah, and the neighbors were not horribly off. No one is rich in this neighborhood where they were borrowing money, but we got mentions a couple of times in the story that, they took the money and got more animals for their farm or something like that. And so it wasn't like anyone was starving if she was taking some of the money back, where her family was starving. This is a life or death situation. So it really put all of my sympathy on her and put my anger on the father. Although I don't think that he is necessarily a terrible person, but she deserved a better father and parents than she had, in my opinion, because when they were getting mad at her and thinking that she's immoral for doing this, like, she had to do it. That's your guys' money that everyone is using to be wealthy, and they're struggling. So and then it was so satisfying to see the neighbors go from being like a bit cocky and arrogant about, we're not going to give you our money, to then being fully under control of this young girl. It was very satisfying to read.
Yeah, I think I didn't love it, but not in like I didn't like it way. It was more, my immediate reaction was sympathy for her, that she had to carry that weight on her shoulder at such a young age. And then, anger at her father for it painted him almost, like you were both saying, like a fool, in the sense that he could be kind-hearted or understanding if someone was struggling and give them more time or be like a bit more flexible. But when you're then people are taking advantage to the point where they're specifically saving it for themselves and lying to you and trying to just take advantage for the sake of taking advantage, there's a level of like, you're being too kind-hearted and too soft-hearted, and that comes across as weak. And just, especially when you're a kid and has to step in to save you all from starving and the mother from dying, you need to be a man at some point, or like the mother needs to step up and do her part in it. And it made me upset that they were sad at her, but like you said, Hannah, they weren't doing anything as the parents should. They weren't really doing their role.
Yeah, there's a difference between kind-hearted and weak, or kind-hearted and fearful, too fearful of how others view you. Though at the same time, I mean, they were a Jewish family, right? In this area where they were very looked down upon. And I'm assuming and kind of gathered from the book that some of that fear being, we don't want to push them too far because right now they're not doing anything about us being here, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? So I understand the fear in one way, but I mean, it's getting done anyway. Your daughter's doing it. Someone's in your family is gonna do it. So then to try to to allow your daughter to get the brunt of that anger, what is he was a coward.
Well, they were an interesting family because on the one hand, they were Jewish and had that fear, and they had that cultural, like they'd even experienced, I think, being in another place or knowing people who had been kind of kicked out of their villages. But they also had the mother's wealthier family in the other city. And that's what Miriam ends up kind of leaning on as pressure for the people in this village to then give the monies, because she keeps threatening otherwise, they'll come and they'll bring the authorities. And so they had both privilege on that end, and then also they did have this kind of definitely dangerous situation culturally. But I think that they were blinded by kind of their fear, like you were both saying as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is I also viewed it as the parents were worried for her future as to what type of person she would become if she started going down that path. In the sense of, would she become cold-hearted? Would she live a lonely life or secluded from her peers? It's kind of seemed to me like they wanted her to have a kind heart, but in that kind of profession, you're not well liked, and you have to kind of shut off that aspect of yourself.
And if they wanted that for her, then they should be doing it themselves.
Yes.
I just think that there's a difference between like what they think is strong, which they think is just like give it all away. And I still think there's a way to be kind and still stand for some justice and some what you're kind of owed. They could have been understanding in certain situations and had more of a discernment rather than all or nothing like they did. But I do think they just viewed its strength differently than she did.
Yeah. And she eventually turns this skill, like you mentioned, Hannah, into a way of turning silver to gold. She ends up, whether it's collecting money or collecting goods to resell for money, she ends up with a knack for making a profit one way or another. and she ends up meeting one of the other POVs, Wanda. And Wanda, for me, was heart-wrenching to read. I don't know about all of you, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So Wanda is just a very unfortunate character. She goes through a lot with an abusive father, drunkard as well, and she's trying to care for her two brothers through all of that and find a way to get out of being wed off, basically, by the father. Um, I'm interested to see what you guys thought of Wanda and how maybe Miriam and her met.
Yeah, Wanda's point of view for me, my favorite part of Wanda was the sibling dynamics, because I found that it was so well done with how, in an abusive household, the siblings are just trying to survive. There's no love that can be fostered in this situation because they're just all trying to survive individually. And then when we see them get removed and get some love placed upon them by other people, and they're not in this abusive situation anymore, suddenly they have this really, really strong sibling bond. And it was so sad to read that they didn't have that support when they most needed it in the abusive household, but then how that was just natural. That's what had to happen for them, because again, they were just trying to survive this growing up in this with their father. And so seeing the growth that Wanda went through both internally and with her siblings was really, really interesting. And it's weird to say fun to read about because it was very emotional, but she got there in the end. So it was nice to see the growth.
Well, and especially since she blamed her two brothers for majority of the book for a
Mhm.
lot of the plight that her and her family experienced, especially with the mother passing on early, trying to give birth to all of these boys. So that seeing her go past the blame and to actually appreciating her brothers was really nice.
I think it felt very realistic in a way, an abusive, just any abuser. I I don't have personal experience for this, but I know that they tend to try and isolate you. So even within the family setting, it made sense that, her father would kind of want all the siblings to not be able to lean on each other and gang up against him or kind of back each other up, and that he did use that to create division. I felt like that was very realistic but heart wrenching.
Yeah. And just to this comment here, I agree. It's something that maybe should have trigger warnings for on the back of the book or something like that.
Yeah. The scene with the dad, since we're in spoilers, dying, it was just
Yeah.
brutal.
Mhm.
That
Yes.
shocked me. Like, I kind of felt it coming, but at the same time, it was a very powerful scene when Wanda's like, "No, I'm not like, I'm done. I'm not putting up with this anymore. No, you're not gonna sell me for more liquor. It's over."
Mhm.
Um, and how that then gave her brothers strength at the same time too, to be able to say no. And, there was definitely a very powerful scene. And I found the aftermath to be so cruel and interesting that they then have to run because instead of this being self-defense, which it should be, like, it was different back then, and then for the youngest to have to be separated from his two older siblings, the whole situation was just like a gut punch.
Yeah, and I think the biggest gut punch for me was actually just that the youngest sibling, Stefan, went to Wanda when Sergi was, got attacked by the Stark in the woods for hunting the white animal. Because I think Wanda even has this moment, it's like, why are you coming to me? We're not close at all. Like, yes, we all are siblings, but like, we're not friends. We don't talk to each other. We hate each other. But it's the realization that there's no one else to go to. Stefan's closest person is Wanda, and they're not close at all. So the complete lack of support that these siblings all have in their lives, that Stefan, even with not having a sibling bond at all with Wanda, Wanda was still the best option to go to in this moment of distress because he has no one, absolutely no one.
I like that they
Wow.
got that family, that they got Miriam's family to kind of adopt them, and they became one big family.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love that they ended up
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. Like, it was such an amazing ending that families in that situation don't get, you know what I'm saying? That's or often don't get that kind of amazing happy ending, and it was really sweet.
I like the way that she also incorporated the mother into that whole scenario for the siblings, because the mother's been passed on. She and the rest of the babies that didn't make it are buried around a tree, and yet she's still there for her kids in one way or another, right until like the big moment at the end. So I absolutely love that as well, and how it was all weaved together. Along with the description from Wanda that when she's learning to read and write from Miriam, she calls it magic. That to me just tells me how poor off they were, that basic element of existence in society was magic to her.
And this might be obvious, but worth mentioning just in case. Like, we have the Rumpelstiltskin retelling with Miriam, but Wanda's is a Cinderella retelling of the original fairy tale, because
I missed that. That is not.
I never missed that.
So not the Disney Cinderella, but like the original fairy tale of Cinderella. There is Mother's Tree, and she is getting.
Isn't there a nut too that like gives you three things? Oh, I know this classic.
So of course it's like loose, it's just, but it is.
I thought that it was a Russian version of Cinderella. I didn't know that was the original.
I mean, I don't know exactly the origin of the original, but like if you just look up like original Cinderella retelling, it might be Russian or German, it might be, but I can't remember. But yeah, it's the Cinderella retell. So there's the Cinderella fairy tale and the Rumpelstiltskin fairy tale kind of being put together. And Wanda, we could see the Cinderella classic, going from rags to riches.
So then is Irina the mirror? There's this mirror fairy tale, isn't there? With the siblings.
There is, but was that wasn't the 17th thing? No.
What is that one called? That's also a Russian one I knew growing up.
It felt familiar to me when I read it. I was like, I've read somewhere else the whole going through the mirror thing.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but maybe that was one too. I didn't think about that.
It's interesting because everyone talks about it as a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, which it is, but I wasn't aware that each one is its own like retelling, possibly.
Yeah, and I feel like it's part of how this book is portrayed too. Even with the cover, we're getting Miriam and the Stark and the gold, silver to gold, and even in the description, we get a little bit of Wanda, but it's mostly about Miriam and Rumpelstiltskin retelling. But I feel like it's fairly. I mean, we get most of Miriam in the story, but I remember reading this the first time. I was surprised at how many other main characters there are in the story as well. It's not just Miriam's story, it's Miriam and Wanda's story and Irina's story, and it's all of their stories and how they're woven together. So yeah, I think partially just from how people talk about it, it's to talk about the Rumpelstiltskin retelling, but yeah, there's that Cinderella retelling as well in here with the tree.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Just kind of going along with that as well, Irina comes in, I think, closer to halfway through the book, doesn't she? And she's in a completely different position, where she's more well off. I think she's the daughter of a boyar, a duke, and her father thinks her plain, just something to be married off. But she ends up catching the attention of the Tsar, and it becomes a whole political scheme on top of a magical scheme with a being. So that whole arc for me, I think what caught my attention the most with it was Irina's relationship with her, I guess nanny would be the term, which was Magreta was her name, and how she strove to protect this woman and all of the people within the land at the risk of destroying another land. So she went from a plain girl that was looked down upon her father to a position of power coming into her own, and similar to Wanda saying no to the Tsar and the since we're talking spoilers, I think his name was Chernabog. Yeah, the fire spirit, saying no and not making a bargain with him.
My favorite part about her story was definitely her relationship with her. What do you call that?
Chernobog?
No, with her her not maid.
Her nanny person.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
her
Magreta was the name.
Lady
Yeah.
in waiting, kind of.
Huh?
Lady in waiting, sort of. When she
Yeah, like her handmaiden, maybe. Like,
I
yeah.
think she was described more of a stepmother in the end.
Well, I loved their relationship, and especially how much the handmaiden Negretta, how much she cared about her, and how it came from. Basically, she was saying at one point, like, she didn't have anything else to care about, so she chose to care about her as a baby, and then that became the only thing that Negretta really cared about, you know. And I found that a very interesting reasoning for developing a relationship or attachment with a child, you know. But then how strong it became between the two of them, and then how that relationship gave Arena gave her Arena strength to stand up to Chernobog. And I think that this book did say a lot about friendship and familial relationships, giving people the confidence and strength to then fulfill their self-worth, or to say no to someone that will hurt them, or to do everything that they have the potential to do, and people not being able to do that when they don't have that support and relationship. And I think this story, especially all of the stories in this book, kind of examined that strength from relationships in different ways. And I really liked that.
I liked how all three stories paralleled each other in the way that people didn't grow closer until they had adversity to face, and they kind of didn't see each other until they had adversity to face. So Irina didn't see Magreta, and even though Magreta had kind of taken care of her, it said in there that they didn't really care or grow closer, confide in each other until they started facing these challenges. And then we have Wanda and the brothers that we kind of talked about, and how Miriam didn't really see the like Sterrick servants until they had that big challenge to overcome, and how then they became closer and they became people that she cared about and then would go to like the ends of the earth to protect. And I liked that coming together parallel through all three of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my favorite part about Irina's story was also just the trickery involved in her plot, where, you know, she's escaping each night and kind of driving him mad with like he has no idea where she's going, what's happening, and she keeps popping back up during the daytime and pretending like everything's all good, and he's just like, how are you doing this? And so the trickery and the strength for her to be able to go and interact with this man that she knows is secretly a monster, a demon that wants to consume her, and just go casually show up during the day and pretend like they're a happily married couple. I mean, that takes a lot of inner strength. That's terrifying. And then again, with the place that she's escaping to, also not being a magnificent place, though, because they're in danger of freezing to death when they escape to it. So it's not like she's escaping to this paradise world. She's in danger in both of these locations, and she's just constantly on the run, seemingly, whether it's on the run from the cold, waiting until she can get back to the warmth, or on the run from this demon, waiting until she can go be lonely in the cold. So yeah, it was a really interesting story to see how her fear and how her strength comes about.
I thought it was funny, Kaylee, too, how he was so frustrated that he couldn't see how like the beauty everyone else saw, and he was just having everyone draw her.
He just kept drawing her and be like,
he was like, this is what right, this is what you see all. It was just the most hilarious that it never dawned on him that it was the jewelry that was giving her that look. That was funny. But I had a question actually. You know the scene where he does try to like force his way on her, and they've got the servants, I think, sleeping in the room, and then they exit the room, and then they like end up bouncing on the bed and making noises if they're pretending they're having sex. And then he cries and starts like first he laughs and then he cries. What was your all thought? Because I didn't fully understand him in that moment. I think it was just he had been suffering for so long that laughter turned into tears, but I want to know if you all like understood any more of like his character in that moment. I was a little confused on that one.
I could be totally wrong and fully have comprehended it in the wrong way. I gathered that, and looking back, this is probably wrong actually, but like at the time I read it that he was crying because he was like, she wouldn't even want to like with him. I don't know how to describe it. Basically, like, yeah, no, like I don't know, like that he felt so alone and like she would rather make a joke of it and make all these noises and everything like that than actually do it with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and basically the monster he'd become and everything like that. But I don't know if that's right.
I interpreted it just as he's been suffering alone for so long, and no one knows what he's going through. And this moment of joy, of ridiculousness, he hasn't experienced in so long that he's just overwhelmed with emotion at the very fact that he felt like laughing in that moment, a true laughter, not laughter to mask inner turmoil. And so that's how I interpreted it, just a
That makes
moment
more
of
sense.
emotional overwhelm.
I think that's like the missing key for me. What about you, Kayla?
Mine was about the same as Kaylee's. I also viewed it as he probably didn't feel so alone anymore. And that was probably a bit of relief as a result, that someone knew what was going on and was surviving with him.
Instead of being consumed.
Yeah, instead of just being, tossed up for sacrifice and then on to the next pretty young girl. He actually had someone he could hold hands through it, so to speak. So I am curious because all of this leads up. She goes from having no plan, escaping into this cold, wintry night to all of a sudden she works up this scheme as she crossed paths with Miriam and Wanda. And all of this kind of comes together as Miriam's put on a deadline before she can return from the Stark's world to her world. She has a lot of pressure there. And then they have this plan to kind of get rid of both Chernobog and the Stark King. I guess he's a king, the Stark King. What did you guys find about that whole plot line, the whole, I guess, the big climatic scene or anything leading up to it? Because at some points, I was really invested. And then others, I was like, okay, come on. We gotta keep going here. We gotta get to the plot or the big climax of it. But I really loved how the strength of all of them together brought out the weaknesses of both the Stark and Chernobog.
I thought it was interesting that whole scenario, when they chain him and everything like that, it took that for him to fully realize Miriam's worth. I was like, really? But I liked it all. I liked all the family all kind of coming together to stand up against the Stark King. Though, I mean, he wasn't as bad as Chernobog, but they didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? So I enjoyed it.
I liked the dilemma between, putting Chernobog in the Stark's world and having him kind of consume that world so that he's out of the humans' world, or vice versa, leaving him in the human world and allowing the Stark world to continue existing, and then the Stark world overtaking the human world. And in a way, it kind of mirrors what happened at the beginning, of course, at a much smaller scale in the beginning, but do we allow ourselves to suffer with no money while our neighbors are prospering with our money? Or do we go and take our money back and have our neighbors suffer more than they are? Like, do we save our world and doom another world, or do we allow the other world to stay and doom our own world? And just the complicated moral dilemma of what is the correct answer. And Irina being in this position of power in the human world, making the hard choice to doom what she is assuming that the Stark world, to doom them to have this demon be unleashed in their world instead, so to save her own world, in a way mirrored Miriam's decision of dooming her neighbors, dooming, so to speak, a much smaller scale, and saving her own household, where suddenly Miriam is on the opposite end of this now, where she is wanting to save the Stark's world. And so I liked that flip around that we saw happen. And I felt the tension of, we're on a deadline, and if things don't get done by this point, one of these worlds is going to stop existing in the way that it had been previously existing. So I definitely felt the tension, and I appreciated too. At first, when I was rereading this, I was like, oh man, the Stark King is like, I don't like him. Like, he is not a good romance option for Miriam because he's kind of so alien. He's just not human, right? He just has different values. And I was like, how can he be with her? But then I appreciated the very end where they go through that courting procedure. It's not like they're immediately together. He has to prove himself to her. He has to do some groveling. He has to learn the human ways. And he's doing that through doing a human's way of courting. So I appreciated that because, yeah, it does take him a long time to realize, oh, Miriam, I should care about. Like, it takes a while for that development to happen.
Yeah, I was really rooting for the romance. So I know, I think it was really well crafted that she didn't lean into it more, but I selfishly wanted it a little bit more for the ending. I thought that I really liked those two.
Cassidy, yep.
And then for the climax of the plot, I found I was really invested in it from when they first tried to trap him in the human world at the wedding to when we then have that kind of dilemma you were all talking about, where do we put him in Chernobog into the frozen realm and hope that at least our human realm survives. I liked all of that up until the mountain part, and that's just because I'm not a very visual reader, so I kind of lost the thread a little bit of what we were doing with the mountain and how the gold turning. I think it
yeah. What was with that? He wanted to keep the gold patches of the mountain wall. That didn't make sense at all to me.
I imagined it like a kind of patch of the mountain, like a strip had been turned into gold to hold it together. But how does
why wasn't he having her why didn't he put a bunch of silver in the mountain and then say, hey, go turn this if that's why he had her there, why wouldn't he have her fix the problem? Why was he having her just turning rooms into that didn't even make sense.
And she makes it into sun. Basically, gold is trapped sun, and that's what kills or defeats Chernobog. But at the same time, the mountain is ice. So how is that holding the mountain together? If it's trapped sun and this is ice, that's where I lost the thread a little bit.
The tippy tops of the climaxes, in my opinion, she has issues with. She kind of just, sometimes I feel like she just slaps some band-aids on her unfinished plot line and it's just well, okay. I don't, that's how I feel about her, the tip of her climaxes, at least for Uprooted and for this one. I was just
I just assumed I wasn't following it well, but
no, I did. I mean, unless I also wasn't following it well. Kaylee, what about you?
Yeah, did it make sense?
I think so. I agree with you guys, but to me, that's just in my opinion, a genre convention of fairy tale-esque fantasies where the magic isn't a hard system, and it's just there are rules, but we're not really told all the rules. They kind of pop up as the rule becomes relevant, and that's why typically this type of atmospheric fantasy is not my favorite, because I do like to have a hard magic system, but that's just something I accepted in this book. And so when I don't fully understand how some of the magic works, to me, that's just part of the genre of atmospheric fairy tale-esque fantasy. So it didn't bother me because that kind of stuff always bothers me a little bit in any of this type of book. So I just choose to let it brush past me to still like the book.
But it can be done well, though. I've read a lot of atmospheric fantasies that maybe there were some conveniences, but they weren't that as jarring as Naomi Novik's, if that makes sense. I felt like hers was
Rules, but they make
so
sense.
over the top all of a sudden, and so didn't make sense to me that it was just jarring. Like, I
They
don't
all
think it was
feel
like that in the Book of Gothel or like The Bear and the Nightingale, but that's just personal.
Yeah, to me, they all kind of feel like that, and so I just have to. It's that's why it didn't stick out in this book, because all of this type of fantasy feels that way to me. But like I said, I just choose to like, okay, I accept this.
Right.
I guess this
It
is a
wasn't affected enough to like bring my overall rating or enjoyment down, because I enjoyed like 90% of the book. It was just
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
yeah.
It does
I
kind
can-
of fit with the like tree thing we were talking about, where there was no magic in the human world except for this mother tree that kept hinting at things for Wanda's family, and that didn't have an explanation. So I think it might be that like soft magic thing you're talking about.
Mhm.
Well, and then he was like, okay, well, I can do it if I have something from my realm, then I can cross back, I can bring the road here. But then he had the tree, and it was like he was suggesting that she had to bring the road there, but really he was still able to do it now that the tree was there. He was fine even without the road. But then he was saying, I can't come back here in the summer because I can't come under green trees. But they had a white tree, and it was not winter, it was spring, and he was over there under a white tree able to pull the road. So what is he talking about? Like, I can't come back. They have a white tree there. Who's saying she couldn't come back into the winter? You know what I'm saying?
It's magic. There's no explanation. It's just
I
magic.
was like, this is like spring, and you're able to pull the road here. Like, I don't understand.
I did like
Maybe
that
only one way.
with the nut in the tree though, because he was so determined to find the thing that he would be able to access like his realm with, and then he realizes it's like owned by Stepan, and he's like, well, I don't have anything to trade, and he's so stubborn about it. Like I thought those moments were quite funny, because it's the value, like the different value system, and it just
Right.
it seems ridiculous
Mhm.
to us, but it's so important to them, and I loved that like alienness that Kaylee says.
Right.
And was it the Snow Queen or the Ice Queen that we were thinking of earlier?
Yes.
Is there a mirror in that one? I need to reread it.
There is technically, they like one of those siblings gets a shard of the mirror in their eye, and that like turns them into like kind of a like evil version of themselves, and the sister has to go to like try and rescue them. So I don't know how true this is, but like how like it's not very loyal to that original fairy tale, but it gave me those vibes.
Gotcha. I found it really interesting how when we come to the end of this, how Irina still finds a way to save the Tsar and her people. And I love how it kind of finished off with one's name can be used to bound them or bind them, and their name is kept secret for that reason. And I love how it kind of ended off with Miriam, and I keep wanting to call him the Ice King because that's how I think of him. But the Stark, where she doesn't tell you his name even though she just learns it as a result.
That like that's the like the most romantic and the like most trusting moment. It's just so, because you know that it's killing him. Like in terms of their traditions, that's like giving up his entire soul. And so just the amount of like what that means to him, that he did give it to her for the love. It was just, I was so all over that. I was really into it.
I loved that he was like the surprise proposal. Like, he went with her to drop her off, and then it was like he asked her parents, and I was like, oh.
That's when I mean, I was into the romance the whole time, to be honest, but like I was thinking it was more of a toxic romance situation for most of the book, because like he just doesn't care about her. But toxic romances can be fun to read about, but for me, caring about Miriam, I was like, you deserve someone that values your life at the very least. But then I think seeing him, because she has had to adapt to his societal norms this whole time. So then seeing him adapt to her societal norms with the proposal, with the name giving, is what sold it for me to have such a happy end of them being together, because we see the give and take that they both participated in.
Yeah.
Well, and they also go from being bound to one another through happenstance to being bound to one another by choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really nice difference because when they first end up meeting and they go through, she has to go through the situations in his world, it's all like, we're stuck with each other and too bad. I don't want this. You don't want this. To like, okay, well, you know what? You're kind of something. So we'll see how we can make this work.
I so badly want like a little novella that just is like a little snippet of them together. And I think that what I like about it starting out kind of toxic is that because we know that we see the relationship become based on understanding and then realization of kind of how strong the other person is in their own way, and kind of that like we're very different, but we're willing to see each other. And also the sense that I know value is like the wrong word because it's bad that he thought her worthless at the beginning, but the way that he understands her value and kind of understands that he placed nothing on it at first and that was wrong. I love that whole dynamic. I thought that was really well done.
What about Irina and the Tsar? Because they had kind of a what do I want to call it? Well, they had a tolerance of each other as well, but they end up growing to respect one another more so. The Tsar respecting Irina because one, she helps him through his situation, but also does it in a way that baffles him, that eludes him, and he just has, I think, a newfound respect for her and her abilities to stand not just against mythical beings, but also political court, which is supposed to be above her station.
I personally did not ship them. I think they, for me, were the toxic relationship that like I couldn't get behind. I could understand them becoming friends or like kind of understanding each other more as the story went on, but I'm glad that there's no hint that they end up together. And I think that that's because he comes off as someone who's willing to play the role of the bully and like step into it, even though he's been put into that role. And I know he couldn't really fight, like, there's a limit to what he was able to kind of fight against. But I think he embraced the role of the cruel person and the bully and the kind of the mean, lording it over everyone else position too quickly and took enjoyment from it and didn't really care, like almost as a defense mechanism. But I think it's what like Miriam's parents had been worried about her becoming. I think he became cold-hearted through what he had been doing. So I just don't want them together in any way, personally.
Well, and he was also...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to add on quick that he was also a sacrifice originally, right? Through lineage. So he probably had very little love for the world based on his situation. Sorry, go ahead, Hannah.
I was just going to say I was really surprised to learn that it wasn't that he had made this deal. He was born stuck this way. You know what I'm saying? And that was like, to me, almost like the big twist, or one of the big twists of the book. That kind of shocked me because he did take on that villain kind of role so well. That I hadn't even thought to consider this was not his choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very resistant to sympathizing with him for a while in the book, because he does have moments where he's like, but what about me? Like, don't you consider my suffering and blah, blah, blah. Like, he mentions that a couple of times. And every time he would say that, I'm like, he was just annoying me. I did find some sympathy for him along the way, but I was resistant at the beginning, just because I think he's so mean at first. I mean, we do get told why he is so mean, but he just it took a lot of work by the author to get me to sympathize with him. I did get there in the end, but it took a lot of work.
So they did end up together though, right?
Yeah, because they're married. They're married before all of this. So they are married.
Like romantically together, just in position of power together? Or is it hinted? Did I miss that?
I think it's kind of hinted that they have a respect for each other toward the end, but their bond is basically marital. But I'm sure like she could probably write a whole other book based on those two after the events of this one.
So it's up to the readers to decide what they want to think will happen in the future. Will they stay like a contractual relationship, or will it turn into a romantic one? It's up to you to just kind of imagine the future you want.
Maria's world. they don't. Just FYI. But I also think I think one of the things that the struggle I have with getting over him and his like sympathy, I also found sympathy for him, but because we have that scene of animal cruelty at the beginning that is mentioned, even though we learn, like you said, the big twist that was not him and that was the Chernobog taking over, I find it so hard to separate that from him doing that, and so that part for me was really like he had no chance from that on.
You'd have to think that if they were going to end up together, there would have to be a lot of therapy. Like, there'd have to be a lot. And also, like, I mean, she's got all these traumatic memories involving him and things that he did. Yes, it was Chernobog, but it's him, like his face, his body, him, his voice. But also, I would assume that he would need a lot of therapy too to deal with having done these things, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that'd be an effed up relationship, honestly.
I think
It's really interesting to read about, though. I would read it.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. You would read it?
I would read it, yeah.
I was just adding on that I think we also didn't see him grow romantic feelings for her. I don't know if you all agree with that, but I feel like whereas we saw the Starrick King kind of, again, grow to appreciate and kind of value Miriam, I think that we never really saw the Tsar guy, Marinades, or Marinatius, or whatever his name is, willing to give up or sacrifice for Irina. I don't know if any of you disagree, but he's very much all about me.
There was something that she said at the very end that, like, something that Irina did gave him a newfound respect and admiration of her, something like that. But I don't think that it was ever said that he had developed. I'm not sure if it was ever said that he had developed romantic feelings for her. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think their romance is really it wasn't a focal point in the book, so we didn't get much of romance. It was more of just like them being forced into this marriage together and then them trying to survive both their marriages together. And so I don't think it wasn't on page. I could see though how a lot of readers would assume that. I guess they've trauma bonded. Not the best start for a relationship, but they do have quite a bit of bonding from this experience, and they do have a respect for each other after this experience. And it's not like they could get divorced in this world, especially with their positions of power in the royal society. So, yeah, I think it's, in my opinion, the book is leaning towards they will develop a romance with each other, but it doesn't happen in this book at all.
Do you all think, sorry.
No, go for it.
Do you all think maybe, now that I'm thinking about it, they're more Beauty and the Beast retelling? Like, is it supposed to be like he changes from the Beast at the end? I feel like that.
Well, Uprooted was a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so I guess you could do two, but
it might have an element to it.
Possibly. I feel like there's a little bit of an element of Beauty and the Beast in almost every fairy tale retelling, even if it's not a retelling of that. Just because it's that kind of concept of like being able to change him.
When they have the glass mirror that she can like commute, that Belle always had, that she could see her family in, right? So I don't know if that has any. Just thought.
Yeah, and a lot of like the fairy tale elements are just really brief reimaginings. So I could totally see that as being a Beauty and the Beast retelling, just a very loose retelling of the basic ideas. Because the Cinderella retelling isn't like every element of the Cinderella fairy tale either. Just basically like the tree idea and the magic, and then the growth from abuse into a happy family situation. So yeah, I could totally see it being Beauty and the Beast.
I would be curious to see if there's ever anything written after this, because he relies so much on the abilities from Chernobog to even convince other people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do, or believe things that sound ridiculous. And he doesn't have that anymore. He has to learn to be a leader now without relying on magical coercion of his people. So I'd be interested.
Relying on Irina a lot.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if he ever, like, of course, it's up to imagination, but if he ever learns how to manage all of that on his own as a result because he loses his crutch. Were there any other last thoughts that you had? Anything else you wanted to share or discuss before we close out?
I want more
Anyone?
like this.
Okay.
Like I really hope her next book is going to be another standalone retelling. I really do. And I want more like polar fantasy, like retelling type books. Adult ones. Not like YA, but like adult ones. But like, yeah. Sorry, my kids are not happy.
That's okay. That happens. Yeah, for me, I'm still I liked this. I think I'd like to try maybe another book from Naomi Novik, but I'm still kind of hesitant just because there were some aspects that didn't work for me in this. But overall, I love the atmosphere of it. I think how everything kind of tied up works for the most part if we're not throwing in the excuse of magic for the sake of magic. But this was a fun read, and I'm glad we got to discuss it and share all our thoughts. Kind of, it seems like everyone had similar thoughts overall. Toxic relationships potentially turning positive versus not.
I think it was so funny because our first one, everyone was so different. I think there was a 5-star, 4-star, 2-star, and 2.5-star. Wait, Maria, you had
I was 3-star for that
a
one.
3-star. So we were all over the place. And then this one we're like 4, 4.25, 4.55. So it's going to be interesting to see how The Wolf of Oren Yarrow goes for our next one.
And with that being said, then, thank you all for joining today and chatting with us, sharing your experiences with it. And make sure to check out everyone's channels in the link in the descriptions below. And have a wonderful Sunday. Bye.
Thank you.